They all turned to look the moment she stepped onto the yacht. Dressed in a plain sundress and worn-out sandals, she didn't exactly match the glamour of the champagne crowd already on board. Laughter spread in quiet whispers, eyes rolled, and phones discreetly pointed her way. To them, she was clearly out of place, a bold, strange woman who either didn't get the memo or just didn't care. Everyone else was in designer outfits, flashy jewelry, and carefully curated looks. She, on the other hand, looked like she had walked in from a different world. But she didn't flinch. She smiled softly, looked around, and walked with calm confidence. There was something about her that didn't match the whispers, like she knew something they didn't. The laughter continued as she took a seat near the edge of the deck, away from the crowd. Some guests even exchanged bets about how long she'd last before being asked to leave. After all, this wasn't just any yacht. This was a luxury charter reserved for the elite. Then, something shifted. The murmurs paused as two members of the crew approached her. They didn't ask her to leave. Instead, they stood straight, nodded respectfully, and said just one word that changed everything. "Ma'am." You could feel the air change, like a wave had swept over the entire deck. Confused glances shot across the crowd. Who was she really? Why were the staff treating her like she owned the place? From that moment, the mood flipped, curiosity replacing mockery, silence replacing laughter. And what happened next? Let's just say, nobody was laughing anymore. But before we get to that part, let me take you back to where this story really begins and how she ended up on that yacht in the first place. Her name was Eliza. At least, that's what the crew called her. No last name, no introductions, just Eliza. Most of the guests on the yacht had never heard of her before. She wasn't a regular in the circles that threw extravagant parties on the water or posted daily updates from private islands. She didn't have flashy followers or a blue checkmark next to her name. But those who knew, really knew, kept their mouths shut and their eyes sharp, because Eliza wasn't just anyone. A few hours earlier, she had arrived at the private marina in an old sedan, one that looked completely out of place, parked beside luxury sports cars and blacked-out SUVs. No driver, no entourage, just her and a small bag that didn't look like it could hold more than a beach towel. The security at the dock gave her a once-over, unsure if she was lost. But when she showed them a small silver card, something most people they had never seen before, they stepped aside without a word. The yacht wasn't just any boat, either. It was owned by one of the most exclusive investment groups in the region, known for hosting high-stakes meetings disguised as social events. Deals were made there, secrets were shared, and reputations could be made or broken overnight. No one just showed up without a reason. So when Eliza boarded in her simple clothes, calm and quiet, she immediately stood out, not just because she looked different, but because she didn't seem to care that she did. That alone rattled some of the guests. But there was one man in particular who recognized her the moment she stepped on deck, and when he did, his smile faded fast. The man's name was Carter Vale, known in high-end circles for his money, charm, and a reputation that wasn't as clean as his tailored suits. He was one of the hosts that night, surrounded by influencers, investors, and people who smiled with their teeth, but not their eyes. When Eliza stepped on board, his confidence cracked for the first time in years. He didn't say a word, but his glass hovered mid-air, and his eyes didn't leave her. No one else noticed, not yet, but something about the way his jaw tightened said this wasn't a casual surprise. Carter knew Eliza from years ago. Back then, she wasn't walking onto yachts. She was behind the scenes, building something powerful in silence. People underestimated her. Some even took advantage. Carter had been one of them. Whatever had happened between them, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Meanwhile, the other guests continued their games, posing for photos, sipping overpriced champagne, laughing too loudly at things they didn't really hear. But whispers were spreading. Some had caught the look on Carter's face. Others noticed the crew checking in with Eliza more than they should have. Someone even asked if she was married to the owner. And then came the dinner seating, always carefully arranged by status, connections, and ego. But tonight, the host changed the plan. Eliza was placed at the center table, the seat usually reserved for someone important. Very important. That's when real tension started to build. People noticed. People talked. Why was this woman, who barely spoke a word, being treated like royalty? But the strangest part, Eliza hadn't said a single thing about who she was, why she was there, or what she really wanted. And Carter, he was starting to sweat. The sun had dipped low, casting golden light across the open sea, but the energy on the yacht was anything but calm. Conversations had thinned, replaced with sideways glances and nervous chuckles. Eliza, still quiet at the center of the long dinner table, had become the unspoken focus of the evening. No one could figure her out, not her story, not her status, not her sudden authority. And every time one of the crew referred to her as *mom*, it sent another ripple through the table. Carter hadn't touched his food. His confident smirk was gone, replaced by tight silence and darting eyes. He leaned in to whisper something to a woman seated beside him, one of his usual business allies, but even she looked uneasy now. Whatever hold he had over the evening was slipping fast. One of the guests, a sharp-tongued influencer named Brielle, finally broke the silence. "So, Eliza," she said, her voice sugary sweet, "what exactly do you do?" It was a loaded question, wrapped in fake politeness, the kind meant to expose. The table quieted, all eyes on Eliza. Everyone wanted to know. Everyone expected her to fumble or dodge. But Eliza just smiled, that same calm, unreadable smile she had walked on with. "Oh," she said softly, "I'm here for a conversation. One I think some of you have been avoiding." That sentence hit harder than a slap. Carter's hand clenched around his wine glass. His voice finally returned, but it was tight and forced. "We don't air business during dinner," he muttered. Eliza turned toward him slowly. Some business doesn't wait for an invitation. The wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled faintly across the horizon, and with it came the feeling that this night was about to change, fast. Lightning cracked in the distance, just loud enough to pull a few glances toward the horizon, but most eyes stayed locked on Eliza. Her voice had been calm, almost gentle, but the weight of her words hung in the air like a storm waiting to hit. Carter shifted uncomfortably, trying to hold on to the last threads of control. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, one of the crew members quietly approached and handed Eliza a slim black folder. She didn't even look surprised, like she'd been expecting it. Without a word, she opened it and slid a single document across the table. It stopped right in front of Carter. People leaned in, trying to make out the contents. The bold header alone was enough to send a chill through the room. **, confidential transaction summary, offshore holdings. **. Carter's expression changed instantly. Color drained from his face, and his jaw locked as he stared down at the paper. No one else spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the yacht's engine and the distant roll of thunder growing louder by the second. "How did you get this?" Carter asked, his voice low and sharp. Eliza didn't flinch. "You should really be more careful with the people you trust." And then, almost perfectly timed, a second figure stepped onto the deck. No one had noticed the small transport boat arrive. The man wore a simple navy jacket, but the emblem on his badge was unmistakable. Government. Not security, not private investigators. Official. "Mr. Vale," the man said calmly, "we need to have a conversation. In private." The table froze. Glasses stopped mid-sip. Forks didn't move. And just like that, the laughter, the glamour, the entire illusion began to crack. But Eliza? She just sat back, watching it all unfold. Carter stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the deck. For a second, it looked like he might bolt, but then he caught Eliza's eyes. calm, steady, and unmoving. He knew he was cornered. The man in the navy jacket gestured politely, but firmly for him to follow. Carter hesitated, then slowly walked away, the folder still clutched in his hand. A hush settled over the table. Everyone sat frozen, unsure whether to ask questions or just pretend it wasn't happening. Eliza quietly reached for her glass of water, took a sip, and then stood up. "I appreciate your hospitality," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "And I hope next time we meet under better circumstances." She turned and began walking toward the stern of the yacht, where the wind was stronger, the sky darker, and the small transport boat still waited. But just as she reached the edge, Brielle, the influencer who had mocked her earlier, called out, "Wait, who ****, really?" Eliza paused. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, over her shoulder, she said with a quiet smile, "Someone who learned the hard way what silence costs." As the boat pulled away, most guests remained frozen, processing what just happened. Some pulled out their phones, not to post but to delete messages, to recheck who they'd spoken to, what they'd shared. A few even whispered about cancelled deals and shady connections they suddenly hoped no one had noticed. But here's a twist no one saw coming. The yacht wasn't just carrying guests that night. Hidden below deck were 2 more investigators, and the entire event, a sting operation built from the inside. Eliza wasn't just a guest. She was the reason it all began. By the time the yacht docked the next morning, everything had changed. Several guests had been quietly questioned below deck, their names flagged in connection to offshore accounts and shady business dealings. Carter Vale was taken away without a fight, but the smug charm he'd built his empire on had completely vanished. News never broke publicly, not right away anyway. That's how operations like this worked. Quiet, precise, intentional. Eliza disappeared just as smoothly as she arrived. No social media, no headlines, no public statements. But for those on the yacht that night, her presence left a lasting mark. The woman they had laughed at, dismissed, and whispered about had turned out to be the one person in full control of the entire evening. And not because of money or flash or status, but because of truth and patience and power that didn't need to shout. Brielle, who had mocked Eliza first, posted nothing from the event. In fact, she vanished from public life for a while, later emerging with a more grounded tone in her content. Some of the others moved on quickly, pretending it never happened. But a few, they remembered, and they changed. The story of the woman on the yacht became a quiet legend, passed around in whispers among the wealthy and well-connected. A reminder that not everything is what it seems, that sometimes the one who says the least knows the most, and that the quietest person in the room might just be the one holding the entire deck of cards. So next time you see someone who looks like they don't belong, in plain clothes, without flash or followers, think twice before you laugh, because you never know who they really are or why they're really there.